very, very clear. The welfare state is here to stay. We're not going to get rid of it. We have to accept that. And I do. I think it's morally obligatory. There's lots of regulation we're going to have to accept. And creating a structure of agreement among countries like the World Trade Organization is a superior replacement to the old imperial system. So I would say that I'm consider myself a classical liberal in modern times, and that means that I don't think the last word on how we are to run ourselves was said in 1830 or 1846 when we abolished the Corn Laws.
So on that point, just to take two examples of the size of the British state and the EU as two structures, do you think either of those are too big, too small, or about the right size?
I don't have a strong.
In terms of their reach
I
as
don't
well.
have a strong view of the scale of taxes and spending. I think individual countries have to decide this for themselves, and there are very big variations. But you have to decide what you're prepared to pay for. I think the great problem in the UK is that we tend to want to spend more than we want to raise in money. Now that
might have to change.
That might well have to change. We have to bring the two together. I think there are lots of regulations that are counterproductive, and there are lots of regulations that are essential. And we should have a process, a disciplined process for considering what we should get rid of and what are essential. I think our tax system is a catastrophe, so radical simplifying reform on a whole range of things will be very desirable. The last chance even to try this was Nigel Lawson, who I support his work back in '84, and that's a long time, and since then the tax system has got a mess. We do lots of spending which is very, very inefficient, and I think there's lots of important spending on infrastructure we're not doing. So my view is radical reform is necessary, but I don't think of it in terms of the size of the state narrowly defined. There are very successful countries with like Sweden, Denmark, with quite big states, and pretty unsuccessful ones with small ones. I don't think that's the right way to think of it.
Another question, again, about your book from Christian Puig, who says, which chapters would you need to rewrite from why globalization works given Trump and Brexit?
I think there's a chapter I would now add, which I didn't have, because it got already so big, which is much more on the problem of inequality in the developed world.
This has been the big theme for the past 5-7 years.
Remember, when I wrote the book, people forget this, it's 20 years ago when I started writing this, or started thinking about it, 19 years ago. The main focus was on how terrible globalization was for developing countries, how globalization was ruining the developing countries. So the focus of my book was how good it was for developing countries. Well, now we in the West seem to think, yeah, it was terrifically good for them.
What about us?
Well, what about us? So the sections on what it meant for us were, I think, as it turned out subsequently, too small, but obviously the book was already very large. That's why I wrote the chapter on the welfare state. I argued very strongly that globalization was consistent with having a welfare state as long as you structured it properly. But so that there's a missing chapter on the impact on the Western countries. And the second thing that I would rewrite radically, I had quite a strong chapter on finance, and I indicated that I was very worried about finance because it was after it was after the Asian financial crisis, so people were already aware that that was really a threat. But in my book, and I reread it recently, I was worried about financial crises coming, and I discussed the possibility, but I should have been more worried because what I said was, if there's a financial crisis in the West, we will be able to deal with it. And the truth is we did deal with it, in the sense it didn't become the 1930s, which is...
But the aftermath.
But the aftermath was much worse than I
Yes.
expected. So now I think I would have been much tougher on financial deregulation, and much tougher also on understanding fully the macroeconomic and financial implications of the entry of China into the world economy. So those are the two big things that I would now change should I ever, I don't plan to, rewrite it.
We've got so many questions. We're not going to get through all of them. But I do want to just come on to the topic that has been a much debate today, which is about President Trump's recent tweeting action. And he, in the midst of yesterday, he retweeted these 3 videos of Britain First, which are not even a political party. They were disbanded as a political party. They're a political group, ultra-nationalist, I think you might say, fringing on neo-Nazi. And there were these very anti-Islam videos he tweeted. And this has seen a widespread condemnation. I was watching some MPs in the House of Commons earlier, and the language they use, calling him stupid, racist, vile. These are all things that elected representatives are saying in the House of Commons. And you've written a lot about Trump's America, and each time you think he's going to double down on his agenda, he always does to a greater degree and shocks you even more.
I think what it tells you is what his real priorities are.
I thought it was the tax bill.
Yeah, no. His real priority is maintaining his own hold over his supporters.
His base, yeah.
His base. That's what gives him power. That's what gives him power in the Republican Party. And by the way, I think it's what he actually believes. So I think this is the true Trump. Alas, he doesn't care about Britain. He doesn't care about our reaction
America
at all.
First, as we heard
America
over again.
first, his base first. Now, of course, he wants to do it in order to do things with power. One of the things he wants to do with power is to cut taxes like mad. That's why I call this Pluto-populism. But he really doesn't care about us at all. And the importance of that, and it fits with our earlier discussion, is that the idea that if Britain turns up after we've left the EU and says, well, we really like a nice favourable deal with the US, would you give it the one we would like, and doesn't create any problems at home, I think the chances of that are zero. We know what their demands will be, and some of the demands in some areas, like agriculture, like the health services, the supply of health services, and investor-state dispute settlement, issues like that are, I think, going to be really, really hard for us. And the fundamental point that Mr. Trump makes clear again and again is that he does not believe in the traditional post-war American policies on the alliance, the support for the West,
NATO,
the support for
WTO.
democracy, the support for NATO, the support for free trade. He is something different. And what I find frightening again brings about is there are people sort of broadly on the pro-Brexit right who just don't recognize the reality that when Britain goes out of the EU, it isn't going to go into this very happy, clubby Anglosphere world, because the core of the Anglosphere, which is the US, is under the control of somebody who doesn't believe in any of this.
Well, I think at that point we're going to draw our discussion and end there. So thank you very much, Martin, for joining us. And again, we'll be back to Global Britain and Mr. Trump at many points in the future, I'm sure. Please do check out Martin's column online at ft.com or in tomorrow's paper. We'll be back next week at 4 p.m. for another FT and K. Until next time, thanks for watching.